Well, let's get the nitty-gritty. We're joined by Advocate Terry Motau, the lead investigator in this case. Thanks so much for your time, sir. We appreciate it.
Good evening. Good evening.
So, rotten to the core, corrupt, blatant looting, strong words when it comes to the people who stole almost 2 billion rand of public money. Tell us who the main culprits are here.
Well, the report details and lists a number of persons and entities that benefited and the extent of their benefit. And you'll appreciate the reason why I had to take that particular approach was firstly to indicate that the amount is nowhere close to what people initially were looking at, but by far exceeds that. And also, what the report does is it names the individuals, it names the entities, and it names or it lists the amounts so that people can have an opportunity. Those who want to come out and deny it, they must put up facts to the contrary.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through some of those details that are mentioned, of course, in the report.
Yes.
You say the large bulk of the funds stolen was for the benefit of individuals and entities related to VBS executives, including its largest purported shareholder, Vele Investments, which benefited to the tune of 936 million rand. Tsiviwa Matodzi, the chair of VBS Mutual and Vele Investments, personally benefited to the tune of 325 million rand.
Correct.
So he, of course, is the main beneficiary of this alleged corruption, what your investigation has found. How then did he and other executives, including politicians, get away with it so easily?
Well, there's a scheme that was put in place. One of the primary methods through which the scheme was sustained was to firstly mislead the Reserve Bank through the monthly reporting by way of DIs. Because the Reserve Bank was given the assurance through reports that were signed off by external auditors that everything was in order. So the Reserve Bank was blindsided. That's the first point. The second point is, if one looks at the acquisition or the purported acquisition of Vele in terms of the stake that it allegedly got from the bank, that was a fraudulent transaction. So that is the starting point, and that should be the central point of focus. Before we can even talk about the bank and its color, we must first talk about whether the bank was correctly acquired, as it were. And I mean, if that was a fraudulent transaction, then the rest that follows is to me very obvious.
Yeah. So let's talk about the way forward before we get to other people implicated here.
Yes.
You've listed 53 beneficiaries of this alleged corruption.
At least.
At least.
Yeah.
What should happen to them? How do we make sure that they don't get away with this, especially since this is public money? We know municipalities actually put money into VBS.
Yes. Well, you would have noted from the report that at the very commencement, I mentioned the fact that contrary to one of the heists where no arrests were made, one hopes that there will be arrests that are made in this one. And that is there for a reason, because we hope, in terms of the process, you would know the recommendations and the findings are submitted to the Reserve Bank, which will apply its mind and decide whether it accepts the recommendations and the findings either in whole or in part. And if they do accept them, they will then recommend or pass those recommendations on to the law enforcement officers, who will also follow the same process. And we hope, with the amount of investigation that has gone there, the integrity of the evidence that has been secured, this will make a job easier for the National Prosecuting Authority to effect some arrests and to prosecute people.
Now, there was mention of a Dudu Myeni Foundation, which doesn't really exist.
Yes.
We know that she's the chair of the Jacob Zuma Foundation.
Correct, yes.
Tell us exactly what happened there.
What happened there is, as it's stated in the report, during the interview of the former CEO of the bank, Mr. Ramavunga, he was asked about a transaction, whether it is correct or not, that an amount of 1.5 million was paid in an attempt to facilitate that deposit by PRASA, and whether that was indeed paid to the SATAU officials in terms of the allegations that were brought to our attention. And in his response, he confirms the fact that the amount was paid, and he confirms the fact that there was an approach that was made through the Tutumieni Foundation. And I mean, in looking at it, it was obvious that there is no such a foundation. He could only have been referring to the foundation that Tutumieni was chairing. So that's the context in which the issue arose, and that's how it is put in the report.
And former President Jacob Zuma,
yes,
not implicated in any way?
Not in terms of the terms of reference that we were given. Because remember, the focus was the conduct of the bank and whether certain things were done correctly or not. And that being the focus, one of the risks that you face by doing an investigation of this nature is to make findings that fall outside of your terms of reference, because that lends itself vulnerable to attack and to be set aside. So I was very careful, and also with the team of investigators that I was working with, to ensure that we stick within the mandate.
And in terms of the loan for the non-security upgrades to Nkandla,
yes,
did you not look at that transaction at all?
No. Well, can I say yes and no? Because it came out as an incidental issue. But whether it was relevant or not to the terms of reference is the relevant criteria. And because it wasn't, that's why it's not dealt with.
So you didn't delve any deeper into it? You had no suspicions regarding that loan?
No.
And the reason I ask, and I'm
yes,
asking you about this, is because you're looking at transactions at the bank, and that was one of the major transactions.
Yes, but if the question is whether in terms of the terms of reference, that is an issue that we flagged, raising certain irregularities, no.
Okay.
I mean, the nuances that surround that particular issue, as I say, were not really entirely and squarely relevant to the terms of reference. So that's the reason why it doesn't feature.
Okay, let's move on to Brian Shivambu, the brother of EFF Deputy President Floyd Shivambu. You say he received 16 million rand from VBS Mutual Bank. Can you tell us where that money went? Do you know for a fact where it went or not?
No, I must say that firstly, the purpose of listing entities and individuals that benefited was in the context of showing the extent of what we say is the looting of the bank, and we list individuals and entities, as I said, together with the amounts that they received. What we didn't do at this stage, or at least in terms of the terms of reference, was to follow the flow of funds, let's say from VBS to the entities and from the entities and how it was distributed. What was done is a desktop exercise by the forensic experts who were trying to illustrate whether is there a link between money that came in and money that went out, and second to that, who are the beneficiaries that received these monies, which we've described in the report as gratuitous payments.
So there's no reason listed as to why he was paid 16 million rand?
Except for that being a gratuitous payment, no.
No.
And that is why it is important for the law enforcement officers, and I hope, as stipulated in the report, or rather as expressed in the report, that action will be taken. The law or the prosecuting authorities in this country will look into the report and will follow these payments. Because what we should not lose sight of is the following. You have a situation where our grandparents, grandfathers, grandmothers, our mothers, our fathers, have invested money in this bank, and they've lost this money. And it cannot be that we talk about the color of the bank and not talk about the victims who happen to be black. And for me, that's the unfortunate narrative that is being put out there. Nobody wants to take responsibility, whether color or no color. There are victims who coincidentally are black, who have lost money, who have invested with this bank, and who pose a risk of losing confidence in the banking system, and which is something that we cannot allow as responsible citizens. So for me, that should be the narrative rather than what people are talking about.
I think the narrative has been that. I mean, we've been outside those banks when those black people you speak of who had money at VBS waited in queues for hours trying to get their money. And this is why there's outrage about this story. The fact that there are poor people who invested money and were robbed by rich people who blatantly abused a system for their own benefit. That's exactly what happened here.
Correct.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
And that's why you recommend that they should be criminally charged.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it should be borne in mind, if people have a legitimate explanation, a plausible explanation, they still have another bite at the cherry. They will face whatever charges that are brought against them criminally, and even in circumstances where civil claims are instituted. People will have their say. If they think there is something untoward about the report, the findings and the recommendations, they still have an opportunity to tell or put their side of the story. So, and I cannot emphasize this fact enough that I hope our prosecuting authorities will act with the necessary and the required forms of intervention.
Now, you say the bank should be no more. We should get that money back, repay the people who that money was stolen from.
Yes, that's in terms of my assessment, and given the extent of the damage and the number of individuals that are involved, in my view, there is no way that the bank can be saved. If we're talking about a bona fide initiative that's built around similar principles, but that will observe the proper banking principles, that's a different issue. But for me, VBS cannot be the only vehicle. You can't, as it were, try to rescue this entity and try and breathe life into it, given the damage that it has done. I don't think reputationally you will still canvass or garner enough support to enjoy, for this institution to enjoy the confidence and to recover from the reputational harm that it has suffered.
Before we end, I want you to listen to an interview we did with one of the co-founders of VBS Mutual Bank, who says they didn't know any of this was happening.
I didn't know that there was such things happening in the bank. You know, and I give myself credit to that, because I ask myself, is it because maybe I am stupid that I couldn't see that happen? But if I realize that it also went under the nose of the South African Reserve Bank Supervisory Department, which supervises the bank, and also the two big audit firms, you know, then I give myself credit and say, yeah, the people who have done this are really professional.
So he says we didn't know any of this was happening, and it slipped under the nose of the Reserve Bank as well. But your finding is that it was signed off and there was a dodgy signature there as well about what was happening.
No, in fact, what happened is this. You must recall that one of the requirements is that a bank should have external auditors. And that is to ensure that there is an element of independence, and also that the Reserve Bank can take comfort from the perspective of integrity, that it can rely on the presence of such auditors, and most importantly, the work that they do. And if auditors put up a signature and they say that the financials that to which they've attached their signature is a correct reflection. One would understand why an entity such as the Reserve Bank, sitting in the position of a regulator, would take comfort in that. So there was a systemic manner in which the Reserve Bank was blindsided into this through the various monthly DI reports that were submitted to say there is no problem with liquidity, everything is above board, including the financials of 2017 that were signed off representing that everything was above board. So there is context to how it is that the Reserve Bank would not have become aware and why it is that once the red flags were on, the Reserve Bank placed the bank in curatorship and instituted an investigation.
And a whole co-founder of a bank saying that they didn't have any idea this was happening. I mean, surely they should have had vested interest in an organization or a company that they started that was helping the poor.
Well, in fairness, perhaps, I'm not quite sure what the co-founder knew and how close they were to the situation. But the difficulty here is this scheme involved a lot of individuals that bought into it and who benefited from it. And I must say it is not everyone, but people who are in central positions and people who had an element of control were strategically positioned, and they knew how imperative their participation was, and they were rewarded handsomely. So I cannot say how close, if at all, the former founder was for me to venture an opinion. And I mean, it's there for the law enforcement agency to look into what has been placed before it. It serves as a basis. It does not confine them to that, because there's a whole lot that did not form part of our terms of reference, and which is mentioned either directly or incidentally because it's relevant to an issue that we're looking into.
All right, thank you so much for your time and your insight. We do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
That was Advocate Terry Motau, forensic investigator into VBS.